Yep,
okay, I believe we're live streaming now.
Just 5 more seconds. It's just setting it up. Nearly there. Cool. Yep. Good to go.
Okay, everyone. Welcome to the Infrastructure Committee meeting of the 11th of May. Just remind everyone we are obviously live streaming, and we're also obviously attending by Zoom. So if everyone can keep their microphone muted unless they're talking, and please feel free to use the chat bar to reserve a opportunity to speak to an item or ask a question. Yeah, welcome to everyone. We have the full complement of the Council Infrastructure Committee. Maybe if the staff could just sort of do a quick introduction of who we've also got online here.
I'll take that. I'll do that. So we're joined by Peter Hansby, who is the General Manager of Property and Infrastructure, Polly Lambert and Jessie Taylor, who are the authors of the first item on the agenda, and Alice Conway, who is the author of the items 2 and 3, and she is accompanied by Tony Pickard, who also has an interest in the items 2 and 3. And also we have Campbell joining us because he is controlling the live streaming.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Jane. There's no apologies of committee members. We're all here. Are there any leave of absence applications that we need to be aware of? Take that as a no. Now we have, and are there any declarations of conflict of interest of the items on the agenda today? Take that as a no. All right, so we have received 2 submissions on public forum, and we'll ask Jane to read those aloud, given we've only got 2 and they're relatively brief, and they both relate to item 1 primarily. So Jane, I'll leave that with you.
Right. Okay, I received Gillian McLeod's one first, so I'll read that one first. And you have received a copy of what she sent, along with, she also provided a marked up version of the document that she was commenting on. I attach a marked up version. I would encourage shorter wording where possible. Following recent events, I feel there are 2 important words to debate in this document. These words are replacing stable with diverse and sustain with align. More than anything, we need to promote the diversification of our economy, and by continuing to invest in Queenstown Lakes as a place to live, will bring diversification of the economy. I applaud the intention to promote healthy infrastructure, presuming this to mean cycleways, walkways, parks and recreation. This brings people to the party. What is a stable economy in a COVID world? Impossible to define, but I think everyone understands that a diversified economy is more resilient than our present singular economy. I am suggesting align rather than sustain as a means of budget allocation. We need to be agile and not stuck with the word sustain. All projects will need revised cost-benefit ratios with far fewer numbers for the near future. Some projects will be unnecessary, and it will be ridiculous to think that they will go ahead because we must spend the budget allocated. I hope you consider my suggestions to replace stable with diverse and sustain with align. Thank you, Gillian McLeod. The second public forum comment was received from Kath Gilmore, and I'll just read from that. Thanks for the opportunity to have input. I would like to support the general tenor of the strategic framework with a couple of suggestions, please. And these are bullet pointed. First bullet point. Right now, diversifying the district economy is one of our most important goals. This could be reflected by changing the third goal to, quote, support a diverse district economy, unquote. Hopefully, this will then lead to stability. Our goal should be to minimise emissions in line with our climate action plan, not just reduce. In respecting the environment's Māori, retention of mature, non-invasive trees where possible should be a basic goal. On page 17, please remove, quote, and pursue the lives they want to live, unquote. Council's role is maximising our overall community's economic, cultural, social and environmental well-beings. And this might sometimes mean that individuals can't live exactly the lives they want to live, or get the particular sewerage system / whatever they think they might need for this. If you include this as currently phrased, then it could lead to all sorts of knotty problems and legal challenges from deep-pocketed individuals. Mention made of procurement policy. Important, please, to ensure local contractors and suppliers supported. If contracts go to national/international operators, then this should be conditional on using local contractors where possible. This is important, not just for supporting the local economy, but also for bolstering our resilience by ensuring we have the essential skills, people, institutional knowledge and physical resources locally when AFH or any other natural disaster hits. Page 18. Design is just as important as location and condition of critical assets. Please add. Queenstown Lakes District has a lot of different communities. Good to have this consistently recognised through the document, in some places it is, so that we recognise that different communities have different wants, resources, needs, etc. Great to see the intent is not to allow contaminants from services to enter the natural environment. So I look forward to the wetland below Remarkables Primary School being made more effective. I see the failed fabric fence has been removed but not replaced. That was the final barrier. What's the planned replacement? Many thanks for your work. Much appreciated, Kath Gilmore.
Thank you very much. Yeah, certainly want to acknowledge the time they've taken to make informed submissions to public forum, and to acknowledge that both former councillors of the Queenstown Lakes District. So thank you. I'd like to seek confirmation of the agenda. Any changes or issues with the agenda today? I'll take that as a no. Which moves us on to the confirmation of minutes from the infrastructure meeting held on the 13th of February, which is a previous infrastructure meeting. Just any comments or feedback on the minutes, or anyone who's prepared to confirm those minutes?
I'll confirm those, Quentin. I'm happy with them.
Okay, Heath is happy to move that. Do I have a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Glenn second on chat, and all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. No one against. Thank you. All right, so moving on to agenda item 1 today, and we have Jess and Polly and Pete here to report on that. What we're doing here is is seeking acceptance of the 30-year infrastructure strategic outcome framework. So I'll invite, I suppose, Pete initially just to speak to this item, and see whether Jess and Polly have anything else to add. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. So I'll hand over to Polly and Jesse, who'll give a bit of a, I guess, a little bit of a rundown on the work we've done to get here, how the framework and how the framework will be used going forward. So maybe if I just hand over, I think, to Polly first up.
Good morning, everybody. I'll take the paper as being read, but I'd like to reiterate some points, if I may. The scope of the activities covered by the framework and the 30-year infrastructure strategy itself are 3 waters, transport and waste minimisation only. These form the infrastructure portion of the LTP investment program. In regard to the process that we've taken to date, the framework kicked off in very early 2019. This was with the P&I managers and also representatives from iwi. And we met a number of times throughout the year, and this was mind mapping the infrastructure challenges and the uncertainties. Vision 2050 was also unpacked, and bearing in mind that that vision had never had an infrastructure lens previously. In fact, we'd had no involvement with that at all. Various engagements happened along the way. This was with the corporate policy team, the spatial planning team, the LTP project governance group, which includes finance, HR and knowledge management, also through ELT and yourselves in the infrastructure committee. And I guess key internal staff have been developing and refining this framework very heavily for the last 5 months as well. Jesse, can I hand over to you to discuss the application of the framework?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Just by way of introduction, I am your infrastructure investment advisor. So there's a lot of you who I haven't met or spoken to before, but that's who I am. The framework that you have before you, I think, will be used in a couple of different but very interrelated ways. The first is in how we master plan our infrastructure services and networks. So the art for our planners who do that work is to consider how those networks and services could and should support a world in which the outcomes we've articulated in that framework are realised. They then have this tension of moving between now and that future point in time and draw on those goals and those objectives to help them plan the possible pathways to get us there. So it's one of many things that they will draw on for guidance as they plan. The second application of the framework is less of an art form, more of a science, and it's how we will build and continue to manage our infrastructure investment portfolio, which will run on a rolling 10-year basis. The way that we do that is twofold. What the framework does is it gives you as elected members for the first time an opportunity to actually consider and agree the balance of outcomes you'd like to see delivered over the 10-year investment period. What we then do behind the scenes is assess the relative contribution of every initiative that could possibly make it into that portfolio against its delivery to one or more of those objectives. Once we have that agreed balance of outcomes, which we will work through with you another time, we can then explore all the different possible combinations of initiatives within that portfolio to best realise that balance of outcomes that you've achieved. So what that sets us up for once we've locked down that portfolio on the long-term plan is a level of agility to respond to that, a risk that that balance isn't being delivered if one or more of those initiatives start to go off track. So we can course correct, or we can perhaps move the composition of that portfolio around to make sure that we're continually working towards that agreed outcome balance. I think the final way we would apply the framework, although it's less direct, is in the decision-making process that we follow for every initiative that does make it into that portfolio. So we go through a much more granular process where we assess all of the different options for an initiative against a very comprehensive multi-criteria tool. alignment to this strategy, but also to all of the other council strategy and a whole bunch of other considerations that are really important in investment planning. So there is that third, more granular layer of really sense and stress testing all of those initiatives. Does that cover it?
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good overview, and I think you know, it's important to view that there's a lot of different levels to this, in that this is you know, a 30-year strategy which informs a 10-year program, which informs the LTP, and you know, at each different level we've got to test the cases against the objectives that we want to achieve. So yeah, thank you. Pete, do you have anything else you wish to add to that?
No, nothing to add. I'll take questions from here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to invite questions from the board. We are aware that there was some changes that Nikki had, Councillor Gladding had put forward as well for discussion. So are there any general comments to start with?
May I make a comment?
Yeah, please. Yep.
I just wanted to draw your attention to an error in the outcomes framework we appended to your covering report. We've presented the framework to you in 3 different places. The first is in paragraph 9 of your covering report. It's correctly worded there. The second place is in 3.1 of the appended document. Unfortunately, we have an objective incorrectly worded. So I just wanted to let you know that that's wrong. So the third objective down, which is the first objective relating to the economic outcome, should read, respond to demand for services in a way that meets customer quality and affordability expectations. So the correct framework is in your covering report, and all of the supporting commentary sitting in 3.3 of the attached is also correct. It's just 3.1 where we have made that error, and I apologise for that.
Okay, and so just to clarify, that we would be to strike out sustain annual market spend and replace it with something else. Is that how I read what you're saying?
Yes, correct. So that first objective where it says sustain annual market spend would be replaced with respond to demand for services in a way that meets customer quality and affordability expectations. So I would encourage you to refer to the table in your covering report.
Okay, now is that clear to everyone? Does everyone understand that change? Okay, so we'll strike out that line and replace it with the one that mentioned. Okay, thank you. So like to invite, I haven't heard any indication from anyone else. Maybe Nikki, you'd like to address your issues.
Thanks, Quentin. I just had a couple of questions, but if you want me to go through those changes now rather than later, I can do that. Would that be better?
Maybe address your questions initially, and then we can
Sure.
discuss them.
So one question, and I just sort of thought of this morning, does it cover construction? Because the 2050 vision is quite clear about zero waste, and I just wondered, there's nothing in there about zero waste relating to construction of services or minimising waste. So I was wondering if that had been considered, or if construction is part of this strategy. And the other thing was, I was going to, ask you how you feel about the changes I've proposed, which were sent through last night. Just whether any of those are of concern, and whether you have any concerns about us making changes at this point. I'll leave it to the chair to direct me as to when to discuss those. Thanks.
Okay, so yeah, I'll just leave it up to Pete who addresses those questions. There's obviously a couple of questions there, but understanding the implications of, yeah, Pete.
Yeah, so maybe if I'll talk to the changes, and then I'll come back to the construction side of things. So in terms of the changes, I think it would be, it's preferable from our perspective that we stay with the framework as proposed. The changes proposed may seem minor and relatively innocuous, but they are untested in terms of their implications as we go through the assessment. And so we'd be concerned about amending the strategy on the fly, so to speak, given that there's been quite a process and engagement with a number of parties in terms of developing the framework as it stands today. We do think that the suggestions that have come forward from Councillor Gladding can be accommodated throughout the broader document, but we prefer that the framework itself remains as is, and that's in part to ensure that we are able to properly measure and are able to measure the outcomes of the investment program. In terms of construction, so these objectives are setting up and assessing projects that are being formulated into the long-term plan. So they will have a consideration for, I guess, those objectives. So I think your reference was around minimising waste. So they are considered at a project level as we go through the business case for the various options. So it's another iteration. In terms of, I'm not sure whether your question also went into the use of different suppliers, that is subsequent work, and we talk about, I guess, some of that in the way that we apply the framework, and that's in the, sorry, just looking for the, that's in the core planning principles. So that starts to inform across the whole program. So the two pieces of, I guess, those principles and objectives work together to ensure that the considerations that you were talking about, Councillor Gladding, are accommodated within the overall program, and you'll start to be able to pull those levers as we go through the next phases. So yeah, in summary, we prefer not to change the objectives as set out in the report.
Thanks, Pete. Can I just wanted to make clear for everybody, because there's been sort of a suggestion that the Infrastructure Committee has been involved in developing this. This came to us at a workshop on the 5th of February, and we had 1 hour, and it was proposed to us that, you know, did we agree with the change in structure and the idea of the framework? And I think everybody did, but we've not had the same opportunity that others have had clearly over a long period of time to have input into the detail. I'm just concerned that this is coming to us now with a agree without amendments or don't agree and upset the whole LTP program. To me, that doesn't feel like we're given a valid choice here. There's a lot of pressure just to agree the document and not actually have any councillor input, and I think it's really important, given this is going to inform the LTP, and given it's going to inform obviously the infrastructure strategy, and there's going to be very little opportunity to shift that. What would, I guess my question would be, what would the process, if we wanted to make these changes, what would you need to do from there to incorporate them? Like, what do you need to test? How do you need to test? How would you test the outcomes? What would be the process?
Well, maybe I'll get Jessie maybe to respond to that, but can I first, I guess, acknowledge, you know, thank you for at least acknowledging that you have had the opportunity to sit with the officers and the wider committee in respect to going through the objectives, and that, you know, acknowledging that that did occur is great. I think my response would be that the officers are always available to work with councillors, and my hope would be that if there was concerns about what was put forward at a workshop, then you would make contact with us to discuss that further. we had an indication from the committee that generally you were in support of the objectives, and that's how we move forward. So thank you for, I guess, acknowledging you were involved in the development of those objectives.
Well, actually, Pete, I'm saying that we haven't had sufficient time to sit down and go through it properly. We had an hour, and I don't think that presentation was even sent to us. I couldn't find it in my records at all. There was no indication that that was our final opportunity to look at it.
Oh, sorry, I
and there
was
no-
probably indicating that we were available to you post that meeting.
It would have been good to understand at that point, I think, that this was our final opportunity to make changes, and if we were concerned, to bring that to you, because we had a very rushed meeting or workshop, and we did not have sufficient time to really sit down and nut it through. Obviously, other parties have had that time, and you know, maybe other people are really quick thinkers, but in that space, no, I'm not. And it would have been great to understand that that was our last opportunity, and if we had any feedback that we needed to come to you with it, then that would have been good.
So, I mean, I think it's clear that this is one step in the process also, in that, you know, that this does that the strategic infrastructure plan, it is something that's required out of the Local Government Act, and it goes through a full consultative procedure. So this is one part of that, and it gets developed, you know, and I maybe Pete could just outline that as that plan gets developed and prior to it going through its statutory consultation process, that we'll still be able to understand and sort of inform that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is just I guess the start of the process, and as I've indicated, we think that a lot of the comments that have come through in respect to the framework can be dealt with either within the 30-year infrastructure strategy, are already dealt with within the way that the objectives are framed up, and will be part of continuing to work with councillors as we go through the next stages. Also, some of the changes we don't think sit within the infrastructure 30-year infrastructure plan, and probably sit in other parts of the LTP process.
And I think in other policies too, Pete. I mean, you know, that there's you know, there's things that touch on procurement policy, there's things that touch on rating and development contribution policy, there's things that touch on obviously the climate action plan and climate action strategy. Notwithstanding that, you know, I do think there you know, that there's some validity in the issues that are being raised. I do think there is, that the framework is set up is if take a step back and look at it, is essentially it's a triple bottom line approach to infrastructure, in that we're dealing with community social well-being, we're dealing with environmental, and we're dealing with finance, economic, all within this structure. And I think that's quite important. Is it fair to say, Pete, that the traditional approach to this strategic has been far more mechanical and engineering wise, instead of being this sort of triple broader approach?
Yeah, I think that is fair to say. Do you want to add something to that, Jesse?
Yeah, I can do. I guess for some context, my role is relatively new, and the purpose of that role is to build and manage an infrastructure investment portfolio that gives us the best chance of delivering the strategic direction that we're establishing here and is being established elsewhere in the council. Historically, we haven't had a framework like this that provides us with a mechanism to connect strategic intent with the way we actually translate that into dollars spent in our business activities. And that's why you will probably see as a result of this work a much more balanced, holistic, comprehensive and inclusive approach to infrastructure investment. We're definitely on a maturity curve that's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I think
you.
just
What
to
I
add to,
found-
sorry, Quentin, just through the chair, just to add to that, very much we were come up with the projects, and then where is our spending able to start and finish? This is saying, what are the outcomes and how much do you want to invest to achieve those outcomes, and giving you the ability as councillors to start tweaking some of that. So it is quite a step forward. It is, with every long-term plan, I believe we get better and get more precise in how we shape these investments for you to consider. So it's an iteration in the right direction.
One thing I found too is that as you read through the document down onto pages 21 and 22, and in 3.2, that there's additional things that inform that. And one of those that sort of struck me was the objectives around environment, natural environment. They actually go on to inform to say that we're actually looking for regenerative opportunities, not just just sort of doing a better job. We're actually looking at reversing the impact, regenerative opportunities that reverse the impact of our infrastructure, and even the ideas of planting and wetlands are highlighted there. The other one that struck me was the suggestions around the emissions stuff, and although it's easy to get caught up in individual words, reduction is reduction, but minimize doesn't necessarily mean reduction. If someone stands there and says we're already minimized, we're already having the least amount of carbon footprint that we think we can, they say they're minimizing it without actually any reduction in emissions. So I think in some ways reduction, it could be argued that reduction is more powerful than minimize, but it also sits hand in hand with the climate action plan, and clearly our goals around that. And I mean, it even goes on to talk about circular economy and energy efficiency, which in that additional information there, and clearly they're things that I think are really valuable informing that. The other one that was obviously really interesting in our current situation is the chart that's been included on page 22, and it'd be interesting to see our recovery chart in relation to COVID. But so yeah, I mean, from my perspective, this does, if you look at the intent and the overall framework without sort of getting down into individual words, I mean, 10 people in a room could all come up with 10 different ways to say something, but I think that the actual approach that's taken here, and certainly the way it feeds through the document, I find quite valuable. I'd probably invite other councillors to comment if they've got any feedback. And Penny.
Thanks, Quentin. Yes, sorry, I'm having a bit of a problem getting my chat bar to work successfully. Yes, I really want to make a comment, particularly to Jess and Polly, because I think there's a lot of hard work gone into this, and it's a massive undertaking. So first and foremost, thank you so much. I think we've got to grasp also that this is a start of a process. So, I'm quite connected to that, and certainly not getting too bogged down in the simplistics of some of the words, because, in amongst this whole process you've been doing, we've had a COVID attack, you know, so we certainly have to tweak. But, you know, when you think we've got a 30-year strategy here, we've got a heck of a lot of work to do, that it's a great start, you know. And from my perspective, when I look at it, you know, the framework to build on this, particularly for the LTP for 21 and that public consultation and the fine tuning, you know, this is a framework and I think it's fabulous and it's a great start forward. So I'm keen to move on and move the motion to get started on it. Thanks, Quinton.
So obviously Penny's prepared to move that. I'll invite comment from, we've got Glenn and then Ferg first, and then, yeah, Glenn first.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make one little comment when you had a little dig at engineers about being worried about the detail. We are trained to look at the whole system, and I think this has been a systems approach with it. I have been involved with infrastructure investment decisions, and we do usually look at the 4 suites of well-beings, and we know that if you change one part of the system, it will affect another part. So, and this approach taken and shown on this strategy, this framework here is, I commend it because it actually does take in a whole suite of considerations. I also want to just touch on what you were saying about minimise and reduction. You are correct. I think reduction is a stronger word. You can minimise a system to a certain level, but to actually reduce it further, you might actually have to change the system. So I do believe that reduction is probably a better word than minimise when it comes to carbon reduction. The argument over align, sustain, and what's the other one? Resilient versus stable. I probably prefer to keep them as they are at the moment. A stable economy, in my view, is also resilient. It's one of the fallouts from it. And I'd also like to keep sustain in there because it talks in this framework about supporting the contracting environment. And there's nothing worse than having a up and down boom bust cycle in the contracting firm. And I'd like to see that sustained and the spend is well flagged and kept to. We've all at this very point, we're under a fair bit of uncertainty, and you can see what that uncertainty does to business. If we, the council, can provide a certain flagging of sustained spend into the future, that certainly gives certainty to our local contractors. And I do note that there has been comment in the public forum about looking after our local contractors, and that is one way of doing it. So I'd like to see that sustained stay there. But I just want to touch on the design side. I know a few people have said put design in there. I think that's the next step after the framework. Once you've decided what you want to do, that design happens, and that design scenarios. It's an iterative process. You go back to your objectives and goals to make sure that your design is meeting them, and then sometimes that initial feasibility design meets a dead end, and you have to go down a different path. I think that's the next step after this framework has been applied. But with anything with this systems type of approach and these investment decisions, you're going to have trade-offs between the conflicting objectives and goals. And quite interesting later on to see how those are weighted and that discussion of those attributes and how they're resolved. But I'm happy to second Penny's motion once everyone's had spoken to the document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate, I think that the discussion, that as I understand the discussion, people can confirm this, is that the idea of sustaining spend is actually intended from this, is that we are trying to flatten the curve and make our resourcing of our contractors and our delivery of through the plan much more sustained and sustainable, is one of the intended outcomes of this, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And All right, so Ferg.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A huge piece of work, as we know, and I'd certainly like to thank staff for their role and what they've produced here. Extremely chunky document, I'd say, for me, but I know the amount of work that's gone into this and the business cases that support a lot of this work and where they sit. I do see the need to progress this strategies development and rolling 10-year investment planning as per page 10, number 5. Listening to some of the other comments, I'm not really a stickler for changing words around unless they really leap out at me. And I would like to acknowledge some of Councillor Nicky's words and reasoning, and also some of those comments that were made through the public forum reading. But in the magnitude of this document, for me, I guess I feel they're relatively minor, and take on board what Pete mentioned earlier, that you know, they can be accommodated in the broader document. So not keen to do stuff on the fly, but I think I'm comfortable to support option 1 in its current form. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And yeah, and Nikki, you had another comment.
Yeah, thanks, Quentin. I just haven't talked through those changes, and I'd like to just very quickly. Just also, I have one more question for Pete and the team. Recognising that this is part of the long-term plan, and that there will be an opportunity to consult on that next March, I'd just like to understand whether we will be able to change these outcomes, goals and objectives after that consultation period in June when it comes to council, or would changing those at that point disrupt the whole LTP at that point? Is it better to change them now or to wait until after submissions and change them next June?
Well, through the chair, the submissions process is when the community get to have their input into the 30-year infrastructure strategy, and depending on that feedback would depend on how significant the changes required to the 30-year infrastructure and the impact on the investments programs that we've developed. So it really depends on that feedback at that point in time. The process we've attempted to go through is to, as much as possible, minimise the potential for that to be contrary to what we've put up in the 30-year infrastructure strategy by, coming to councillors and the stakeholders that we've already been working with to develop them up. So through a stepped approach, we hope to avoid there being major changes coming through that consultation process.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's more efficient if we wanted to change something to do it now and to have the opportunity to do it now, so that all the work that the staff are going to do between now and March will remain in place. Just talking to some of the changes I've put up there. I'll skip to the ones that I think are most important, starting with 2. So in the objectives, you've got an objective to sustain the affordability of services, and you've listed the ways you could do that. So through efficiency, through effectiveness, through funding opportunities. To me, there's a really significant one missing, and that's by enabling the equitable allocation of costs. And I bring that up through experience. The way that we, if we can enable equitable allocation of costs through metering or through design, then that should be an option alongside the others. Otherwise, we potentially skip one means of achieving affordability and jump to potentially something like a funding partnership, which may have inherent issues. So I'd like to see that in there. I think that's really important. The other one I'd mention is Gillian O'Cloud's.
Can we just discuss that initially? I think it's useful maybe to address these in turn, just so we don't get caught up.
Sure,
but
thanks,
I do
Mr.
think,
Chair.
I do think that there is, you know, I understand the point that you're making, and you know, as we've discussed offline, I think that the opportunity for that is through the rating and financial contributions policy. You know, that the affordability is obviously the primary driver between the fair allocation of costs. So it is fully encompassed with that, and I think that that those decisions around how those costs are distributed fully sit with council, both through other policies and through decisions that council makes. So I don't think this would in any way impact our ability to ensure the costs are reasonably distributed. So is that fair to say, Pete?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so
I could just speak to that because it is from, if I can give you an example, and it does relate
Well,
obviously to
I think,
my town in Glenorchy, where
you know, in order to
it's
just to keep some order to this, you know, I'm happy for you to make your points, and that we can have a response. There can be a response to them, and then maybe we can move on to the next point. You know, you are able to. I'm very happy for you to make those points, but I don't think it's helpful to. We understand that you might disagree with them, but you know, we don't want to just keep back and forth on an individual item. We're trying to sort of work through the concerns and see whether there's a way to address those.
That's fine. Does anyone else have a comment on that point?
If I could, through the chair, I just wanted to reinforce that let's not lose sight of the fact that I think we're all in agreement that the way forward and the objectives and the measures is generally, I think, supported in that the direction's the right way, but there's some critiquing of the words that I guess Nikki is proposing, which does have implications, as I've suggested. But I think it's really important that we are, I guess, alert to the fact that actually there's the objectives as they stand are not causing councillors great concern. There is more tweaking, but generally they are in the right direction.
Yeah, and you know, I think that understanding the intent and the concern that Councillor Glading has, and whether that is addressed in either this document or in other places, is not dismissing the concern she has. It's just addressing where that sits correctly, potentially.
Yeah, agree.
Okay, if I'm still carrying on with going through these, whether there's a point or not, I'm not sure. In terms of a line, I think that was a really useful word that Gillian McLeod put forward, especially now. I'm not sure that we can put the pressure on our financial team to sustain a spend or on our ratepayers. I'm not sure what we're sustaining, what is the baseline that we are sustaining, because that's what that word implies. If we use a line, what that does is it forces us to look at how we allocate the money that we have to support and strengthen our economy. So that then looks at where we're spending it, what projects we're spending it on, therefore what contractors would be involved, how we spend it over time. It drives us to be more careful that with the money that we have, to ensure that our local contractors are supported. So I think that is a much better word, and it does have implications, and it is significantly different from sustain. If we had less money, we could perhaps change our program to include more smaller projects that more local contractors could be involved in, and more of the money could be spent locally. So I think that's a key change to make, and I'll leave it open for anyone else to have a comment. Any comments on that?
I wonder whether you respond to that, and I suppose specifically with regard to that concern around how the costs are distributed, you know, to local contractors, and also how, you know, whether sustain means consistent, or whether with the changing circumstances or something else.
Well, yeah, thank you through the chair. The delivery of the works and how that engages with the local contracting market or supply channels is part of our procurement approach, which we're absolutely aware of the challenges that some of the small to medium-sized enterprises have at the moment, and the importance of ensuring that packages of work are attractive or available to those contractors, either in partnership with larger contracts or in the individual contractors themselves bidding for work. So absolutely aware of that, and no question that is important. In terms of the sustain of the spend, so the LTP will determine what are the projects and the investment required. We're indicating that when we have that program, the most effective way and to support the supply chains or industry is that when we put that out there, that we do it in a consistent way so that we get the spend up to a point and we maintain it at that point, so that the contracting or the supply chains have the ability to plan with confidence and to either resource up or resource down, as may be the case. So this getting up onto a plane and staying on that plane gives that confidence to those supply chains. And I think I echo the words of Glyn in terms of that boom bust is really challenging for contractors and is something that they won't be interested in either gearing up for or remaining a partner to us if we're operating in that way. But just to reinforce, the LTP sets what that spend is. So that's what we're trying to sustain.
Okay, and so did you have any other ones there, Nikki?
Yeah, so the final two, so optimizing resilience through design and innovation, that relates to resilience to natural events. So at the moment, what we've got are two objectives which seem to be, to a large extent, ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So make sure we get back up and running. And I checked the rest of the document because obviously what's in there, as you pointed out, Quentin, is important in fleshing out these objectives. There is no clear steer in there to look at the design of our infrastructure to optimise resilience, and I think that needs to be there. Again, personal experience, we're dealing with wastewater systems. There was no drive from the staff in the past to prioritise resilience when it came to infrastructure. There was a much greater focus on putting forward a designed system that would be easy for a contractor to manage rather than optimising resilience, which is what ratepayers need, because at the end of the day we pay for that infrastructure when it breaks. So I think that needs to be in there. Any comments on that one?
So Pete, could you just, I suppose, inform what drives our design criteria around resilience of our infrastructure?
Yes, so resilience is always a factor in our business case preparation. So we work through that quite intensely as part of the business case review. So I think I'm not sure that I quite understand the Glenorchy example, because we would always look to build resilience into any scheme or proposal that we put forward. That resilience might come in many different ways, but we always contemplate that as part of the business case development. So I guess that's our position on that. I think what I would be concerned about is that in bringing design and the diversity into it, we might be saying that we're diversifying our way out of the resilience problem, but that may not be the best option. We may be able to manage our way out of it, or we may be able to invest. So we just want to make sure that we don't close our options out within the objectives. and set ourselves down a path of only considering one mechanism to manage resilience.
And redundancy, which is the point, I suppose, is redundancy is a big part of resilience, isn't it?
Yep.
So, Nikki, I will have to ask you to just one quick point and then on to Heath.
Sure, and the final one is that we've got in there as an objective, services reduce impact on global emissions. That doesn't go far enough, and we should automatically be including in line with climate action plan targets. That's just, to me, really simple, and I'm not sure how anyone would argue that one.
Happy for Pete to address, but I would say that this doesn't override our commitments through the climate action plan in any way. It handshakes with that. So that's...
Yep, that's absolutely correct. So it's not looking to override it, it's looking to work in partnership with it. But we tend not to reference other documents within the objectives.
And there's, in my experience, there's good reason for not referencing the other documents specifically, because the other documents change and they obviously get updated and renewed. So if you reference a specific document, it sort of invalidates the document if it becomes redundant. So I think
I'd argue that because, I mean, we're
from that perspective, I think the that there's a strong commitment to climate change action, and that is reflected further down in the document as well, as I said, right through to regenerative approaches so.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we're already intending to do that, would that be an issue including it in that case? Because I think regardless if the climate action plan changes, then automatically it changes with this changes with the document. So it doesn't matter if the action plan changes.
Likewise, it goes the other way. If we actually increase the toughness, I suppose, of the climate action plan, it actually increases the effectiveness of it. Increases its impact across our infrastructure investment as well. So it doesn't preclude that in any way. Heath, I'd like to invite you here to.
Thanks, Quentin. Just in the essence of time, I'll try to keep this short, but just want to add a couple of comments to that. I just want to echo what Penny and Farag have said to the team. Thank you very much. I think it's a good document. Glenn, totally agree with all the comments that you made so far around the wording and things. And Nikki, I understand you've done a lot of work on going through this document. So it's been a bit of collaboration with the community, some of the louder voices in the community, and I think that's great as well. All I'd like to say is this is an overarching document. I think we need to step back and just remember we're talking about infrastructure, right? And for me, infrastructure doesn't necessarily become the solution to a diversified economy per se. It's a cog in the wheel to mean that we can live here and we live here comfortably and things like that. Nikki, just to talk to the changes that you've made, I don't disagree with any of them, but I actually don't see any fundamental changes to this document by implementing them. To talk about substituting one word for another, talk about align and sustain. I spend a lot of time talking to lawyers on a daily basis. They would argue both those words mean exactly the same thing or not, depending on the day. I think you can argue sustain means align and align means sustain till the cows come home. And it doesn't really change the document if you substitute one for another. Likewise, I think all the other changes like the climate action plan and the design around resilience and stuff, that's inherent in the objectives and in what this document is trying to achieve, in my view anyway. So I think it's, as I say, although I don't disagree that they're good, I just don't think they're required. And I think we need to go through the work to do them. So on that note, Chair, I'm more than happy to go to a vote and see where this goes.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like, Penny indicated she was happy to move. I will invite her to do that.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm keen to move the motion as in option 1. Thank you.
Okay, and Glenn, you indicated you were happy to second that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll be happy to second it.
And following a motion, the councillors do have a right to respond to that. So are there any responses to that? Was that you, Nikki? Sorry.
No, Quentin. The councillors have indicated I was intending to put an amendment to the motion, but I think that's just going to be a waste of time at this point. Everybody's indicated their position, so I'll let the vote go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All those in favour? Aye.
In favour?
Glenn?
In favour.
Oh, you seconded. Penny, vote moved it. Heath?
Yeah, affirmative.
Would you
Okay,
like me
move.
to follow the process that we used in the council meeting?
Yes, you're welcome. Yep, please go ahead, Jen.
Okay, well, I will do it in random order. So Councillor Ferguson,
In favour?
Councillor Smith,
In favour?
Councillor Gladding,
Opposed.
Councillor Lewis, you seconded, so I assume you're Councillor Copeland
Affirmative.
and Councillor Clark.
Affirmative.
Right, so the motion's carried.
Thank you. And yeah, the motion's carried, and I'd like to reinforce to the team that, you know, we would like to continue to see and be engaged with this as the infrastructure committee as it moves forward to the strategy and to the long-term plan, and I'm sure we'll do that. We've had good engagement with you guys, so I invite that to continue on this case, and to take the suggestions that have been discussed on board as we develop that our own, how it can be informed and interpreted, and further informed to reinforce those points that have been made.
Great.
So moving on to item 2, we've been asked to a submission on the investment decision framework. We have Alice and Peter Hensby reporting on this. So there are 2 aspects that NZTA have sought feedback on, and I'll ask Pete to sort of comment on that.
Good morning, everybody. I'm presenting the submission here to you. Just as way of context, I'm part of the corporate policy team, and so part of my role is to bring together submissions on behalf of and in partnership with other officers. So this one is the investment decision-making framework, and the papers to be taken as read. Tony Pickard is here to answer any technical questions. I'm happy to answer any questions on process.
So I suppose, you know, just to be clear that this informs our applications, I suppose, to the RLTP and through the program and the program business case approach in terms of how they're weighted and considered.
If I can answer that, Mr. Chairman, yes, they are. Both these submission papers are our ongoing involvement in trying to improve the process for understanding the investment availability through the New Zealand Transport Agency, and we constantly do that by engaging through these smaller elements, particularly through their investment assessment frameworks, so that we understand more clearly on what it is we're applying for, so we can optimize the possibility of investment from them. Having a better understanding improves our position, and yes, that informs our business cases.
And so just in broad sweep, I understand that you're basically arguing that the scope of the business case should be relative to the size of the investment, firstly, is that right?
That's correct. There are a number of ways of improving the process as it stands at the moment, and this is what we forward through the submission in response to the I acknowledge the humour there. This is what we've put through the sort of templated approach to in this submission. We find that we are going in circles on some of these things. We've been intended to go through program business cases to get individual projects, and then vice versa. So everything we can do to narrow the process down to make it more open and make it clearer on what we need to apply, what range we need to apply. We break things down into our low cost, low risk. We have those significant projects, 50 million or more, which have to go through an even more convoluted process through the Transport Agency's board. We have that middle ground between 1 million and 50. What this process is doing, and it's allowing us to maybe streamline some of the $1 million to $5 million range or something of that nature, so that we can speed up this very lengthy process that you're all aware of. And this is the crux of the submission. How do we improve that system?
Yeah, and I can certainly speak to that through the experience of the Valentine Road business case, that it was it's taken more effectively 4 years in order to seal a road. So, are there any other questions from, or anyone happy to move? Glenn's got a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Tony, I'm happy that you're going down suggesting a more leaner, more agile business case scenario. There is a institutional inertia, as I call it, in trying to get things done when it comes to working with our partners. Just wondering, with you're talking about the ceiling on investment and how that changes the process. Is there any is it worthwhile in actually pushing for that 1 million ceiling to actually be pushed up higher? It just seems a very grey area. Once you hit that over that 1 million and between that 1 to 50, you seem to be caught in no man's land. That's the feeling I get from your comments. Is there any move to push that ceiling higher?
If I can respond back through the chair, yes, there is, but to put it in context, in the last round, the low cost, low risk ceiling was 300,000. So the jump up to 1 million has been significant. The issue is when you have more than one item, you have a couple of crossings, a couple of intersections, you put them together, they bundle up as more than that $1 million limit, then you're into business case territory. What we're suggesting is there is a light version of business cases, as the Transport Agency used to reject when we used the BBC Light version, which is a treasury model. We put those in about 3 years ago. They threw them back out for lack of detail. That's what they're now suggesting would be a good idea to speed up the process. We are constantly trying to improve. We are constantly trying to inform them. And I think this is an input that comes from lots of our local government partners trying to put into the Transport Agency, recognize the speed at which we need to work, the huge amount of information we have to put in. It doesn't help the efficiency in identifying projects and having a good investment program because we're waiting too long. The world is going past us.
And does that lead on to what I see in the last part of the submission, that incrementalism that we seem to be getting instead of some decent step changes, especially when it comes to public? I'm just wondering, is it still quite tough to actually get that thought process to actually, not from yourself or from others, that big step change to actually happen? Are you actually, is there any appetite for that within the agency or our partners?
I think the opportunities come through persistence in this approach through their investment framework, but also looking almost parallel this to their other opportunities, such as the Safe Network program, which allows us to maybe speed up some projects to get them before our decision makers quicker. So certainly from our side, there is a constant desire to want to change. And I think at the hierarchy in the Transport Agency, there is a desire to change, integrate and smooth things. I think where it falls down is in the low level process, and we are putting applications against a set criteria which are out of date. And this is part of the reason for the submission, is to help change that background. Your economic assessment is one of the worst. The Transport Agency realised it's out of date, and so we need to offer our support for that to be changed.
Thank you. Yeah. Mr. Chair, happy to move this once discussion's over. Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
Oh, sorry, Nikki, I'll invite your comment.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I've got no problems with the content. I mean, my understanding of detailed transport business cases isn't fabulous. So definitely no concerns raised. Endorse that last point as well about being able to shift to more transformative options. It was really good. I do have a concern though. It would be great if we could have, when we get these coming to us, if we could have the report that you're referring to set in as an attachment so we can see what you're responding to. That'd be great. And if we could also, even if we can't have a meeting, I know the timeframes for some of these are short, but if we could at least have an email to councillors so that we're not constantly being asked to approve retrospective submissions, if we could see them before they go in, whether it's via a meeting or not, doesn't really matter, just email would be great. Thank you.
I can talk to that if you'd like me to. We are we are in the process of streamlining the submission process so that that becomes a better process for you, and so that we don't have those retrospective submissions when at all possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do think that's a fair request. I do think we need to avoid retrospective approvals, and also I do think we need to be, I mean, the Arataki document, for instance, on the next item is quite an interesting document. It would be useful to have that background, or at least a link to that background if not. So are there any other comments? Glenn is happy to move. Any second?
And he's happy to second.
All those in favour, or any other comments? Sorry. All those in favour?
Aye.
Sorry, we should do the correct practice, Jane. I'll leave that with you. Sorry.
Sure. Councillor Smith.
Favour.
Councillor Lewis, I assume you are since you moved. Councillor Copeland.
Affirmative.
Councillor Ferguson.
In favour.
Councillor Gladding.
In favour.
Councillor Clark.
Affirmative.
Well, the motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. All right, so moving on to the item 3, Arataki. This is a similar discussion and obviously sort of handshakes with it. And yeah, Tony or Alice, do you have anything to add?
I'd just like to say, sorry, Tony, I would just like to say to start off that there has been a late change to this report, and I believe you received those changes. So although we have already submitted on this, we've already submitted this to the NZTA, we do have a short window of opportunity to add to that submission if required. This is not the final opportunity to do so, as there will be subsequent versions that will come out that we can submit on afterwards.
Yeah, and as I understand it from our meeting with the Regional Transport Committee, that the Arataki sits up higher above the regional transport land transport plan, and it's sort of a direction of travel for NZTA over a 10-year period. So it's sort of trying to create a bit of a high level vision, but it doesn't really have a statutory context in the context of the RLTP. Is that correct, Tony?
It does sit above those documents. I think the idea of this is that the Transport Agency has always had its future 10-year program, but it's not been very visible. So part of the reason for Arataki is it gives local authorities, regional authorities, an LTP type document to look at, because this was where we understand where the priorities of investment for the Transport Agency are, in line with the current GPS. So they do sit above the RLTP. Previously, the Transport Agency would just look to see if a project was in the RLTP and ticket. This gives us the opportunity from the sort of lower order, if you like, to look upwards and see what is likely to be investable or where they think they're going to spend or apportion their money over the next 10 years.
Yeah. And so it sits in sort of the realm of, yeah, above the GPS and the RLTP. It's sort of in a fairly high level funding within ZTO area.
It does, with one difference is that this now contains more of a regional summary, and that's where we're keen to feed into, is that they understand the local context rather than just taking the GPS approach, which is applied nationally.
Okay. I'll start with my comments. I mean, I've been, as I said, I've been involved with the a workshop recently with the Regional Transport Committee around setting objectives for the next RLTP, and obviously, you know, giving consideration to the GPS. So there's definitely some interesting context. This, for me, you know, I've been a big supporter of future planning, obviously emissions reduction. You know, we've made clear direction on that. The one that concerns me most, I think, probably is the spatial planning component, and as to the degree we rely on spatial planning. Now, you know, I've certainly embraced and am trying to get useful outcomes out of the spatial planning, but personally, I'm not at a point where I can hang my hat on that process yet, because I haven't seen the outcomes of that. So I'm reluctant to put all my eggs in the spatial planning basket without sort of having confidence in that outcome. But I certainly am committed to working towards that outcome. So that's my only caveat. You know, very happy to, as I said, support the idea, but you know, I'm not quite sure it's going to land and where it's going to sit us yet. So. Any other comments? Glenn, sorry, where were we up to? We've got Glenn's got a comment. Yep.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify with Alice, Mr. Chair, that so we now have 3 options on the table. That's correct. So previously we had option 1 and 2, agree or disagree with the submission. And I take it that was, you put that submission in under Arataki version 1.0, and now there's
yes.
Arataki 1.1. So
yes.
Yeah, so option 3 now is we can put in a further addition to our submission with respect to Arataki 1.1. Is that correct?
Yes, so the Arataki 1.1 has had just technical changes. We were already all expecting Arataki version 2 to come out in approximately August. That's the indication that our submission would be part of. But yes, we've just had this small window where we've got the opportunity to put in additional feedback if we want to.
Okay, and so once Arataki 2.0 comes out, we'd have further opportunity to speak to that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I've been in contact with the Arataki team, and they have said that there will be a future version 3.0.
Okay.
Right. This one is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So the only...
I'm going to say that this is not a cut. I understand this is not a cut and dry, you know, fixed consultation. It's an ongoing sort of iterative process. That's correct.
Yeah. So the only comment I'll make between 1.0 and 1.1, when I read it last night, just on the regional side, was I was still talking about investigation and feasibility with regards to the post-COVID-19 with respect to Queenstown. And I was just a little bit alarmed at that, because it then allows them a fallback to go, oh no, we've had COVID-19, let's withdraw what we've decided to do anyway. It just gave them wiggle room to pull out of any funding towards what we're trying to achieve. There was just a few little things in there that just sent alarm bells running. I'm happy to go with option 1 or 3, but if we've got the chance to talk to it with version 2.0, I'm quite happy to go with the option 1. It's this where I'm sitting at this stage. But thank you. That's all I got, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'll just comment to concur and a little bit nervous, like Glenn, about that process. A little housekeeping detail, if we're in future, we're just page 35, sort of sat in the document as a different piece of someone's work in comparison to the rest. So I just think we need to be a bit careful sometimes to tidy up. You know, on that particular page, our English, our spelling, our font is all not the same as the rest of the document. It's just a housekeeping detail, just to highlight. Thanks.
Made a note of that, thank you.
Do I have anyone move? I think Glenn's happy to move. Do I have a second? Ferg's happy to second, or, and Jane, I'll leave it with you. So.
Okay, Councillor Glading.
No, she was muted, but she said in favour.
Jolly good. Okay, Councillor Copeland.
Affirmative.
Councillor Clark.
Affirmative.
And Councillor Smith.
Affirmative.
Right, so the
And,
motion is,
yeah,
sorry?
thank you. No, that's fine. Yep.
Motion is carried.
Okay, and with that, completes today's infrastructure meeting. The infrastructure committee have an internal workshop this afternoon, and we'll see you back here for that. So thank everyone for their patience today and for the submissions that we received. Submissions continue to be an interesting public forum. Continues to be interesting challenge in our COVID remote working environment, that they were, you know, well-informed submissions and received ahead of time and not too extensive, which were able to be read. So that was useful. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you this afternoon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you.
So